When neuroscientist Robin Carhart Harris and his team wanted to study how psilocybin mushrooms, a type of psychoactive fungi, interact with the brain, his initial hypothesis was that the psychedelic experience would increase cerebral blood flow. They predicted that in an fMRI scanner, this would show up as increased oxygen levels across the brain. They noticed, however, that there was a significant decrease in oxygen level concentrated around one specific brain structure, the default mode network. The default mode network, otherwise known as the DMN, was discovered in 2001 by a neurologist named Marcus Reichel. When Reichel was studying volunteers in an fMRI scanner, he noticed that when they were waiting in the scanner to take part in a test, several parts of the brain showed heightened activity. This was the brain's default mode, and this network of structures light up when the brain has no task to perform. In other words, the DMN is where our minds go to daydream, self-reflect and worry. The DMN also plays a key role in creating mental constructs. One of these constructs is what psychologist Sigmund Freud called the ego, which some neuroscientists call the me network. The ego is a mental mechanism that the mind creates to distinguish the I as a separate entity from them and that. It is the ego which is concerned with how we are viewed and how we form our identity based on our experiences. This is why the DMN lights up when we get likes on social media and when we go back into our autobiographical memory. The development of the ego was a great evolutionary step as it allowed humans to focus on the advancement of the self. This is because the ego is only concerned with being conscious of that which is needed for getting ahead, getting food and reproducing. But this mechanism also comes with some drawbacks. As the ego distinguishes ourself from others and the world, it separates us from everything external from us, leading to a sense of isolation. Furthermore, if the DMN is faulty, it can lead to excessive self-reflecting and worrying, and the ego's rigid filter will hinder the mind from opening up to more than its current thoughts. This inevitably leads to destructive behaviors. Once consumed, psychedelics disinhibit the reducing valve of the ego and quieten the DMN. The psychedelic experience loosens the filter and frees the mind to enter other realms of consciousness. It allows the mind to create new thoughts. Carhart Harris theorized that some psychological disorders were the result of excessive order in the mind and not a lack of order. He suggested that when the DMN settles into the same rigid patterns of thought, the mind is unable to create new mental states and ways of thinking. Research has shown that a hyperactive DMN causes individuals to be trapped in repetitive and destructive loops of self-reflection which eventually shut the person off from the outside world. Disorders such as depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder (OCD), and addiction are characterized by excessive rigid patterns of thought. Carhart Harris theorized that some psychological disorders were the result of excessive order in the mind and not a lack of order. He suggested that when the DMN settles into the same rigid patterns of thought, the mind is unable to create new mental states and ways of thinking. Research has shown that a hyperactive DMN causes individuals to be trapped in repetitive and destructive loops of self-reflection which eventually shut the person off from the outside world. Disorders such as depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder and addiction are characterized by excessive rigid patterns of thought. Psychedelics have been shown to disrupt these patterns. The exact way they do this is uncertain, but research points to their neurochemical effects on the brain. Psychedelic compounds bind to serotonin receptors, causing neurons to fire in a certain way. This firing of new signals disrupts the usual oscillations of the DMN. You can imagine this if you think of an audience clapping in the same rhythm. If there are few people who produce some wayward claps, the entire rhythm will desynchronize to chaos. Once these patterns are disrupted, the mind is then free to create new possibilities. In this picture is a simplified model of the number of neurological connections in the brain between a non-active placebo and psilocybin. As we age, our perception of reality is filtered and our brains become efficient machines in dealing with life's everyday situations. This causes the neural connections in our brain to act automatically almost by habit, and these connections become ingrained. This is what the image on the left is showing. The image on the right shows all the new connections the mind makes when on a psychedelic substance. Studies show that this psychedelic experience has profound effects for addiction in particular. In one study, 80% of addicted smokers who were given psilocybin achieved cessation of their habit, a rate that has yet to be achieved by other smoking cessation treatments. Other studies showed that after psychedelic experiences, addicts admitted a sense of awe at being connected to the world and others, and because of this, recognized the harm that they were doing. Furthermore, Bill Wilson, who is the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, implemented in the organization the lesson of surrendering to a higher power because of his spiritual experience with a psychedelic drug. While psychedelics, as medicine administered by therapists, would help to ease suffering for the unwell, what the insights reveal about the mind are equally useful for the well. In studies where healthy people were given a psychedelic, many described their experience as mystical. The mystical experience is represented by many factors which include a sense of awe, an attainment of insightful knowledge, and the fusion of the personal self into a larger whole. After these experiences, people come away feeling more grateful for being alive, they implement what they've learned to make changes in their behavior, and they feel that they're not a small separate entity in the universe but that they're part of it. They escape the prison of perception and now have new meaning in their life. Psychedelics therefore teach us that there's a network in our brains that, when working excessively, leads to mental suffering. Studies show that meditating, praying and fasting also quieten the DMN. If we learn to quieten our DMN, we may feel less of the existential discomfort from feelings of isolation and meaninglessness. No longer prisoners to our perception, but free wills to control how we experience life.